It started with one sentence: blunt, explosive, and impossible to ignore. On a live broadcast that was meant to be a routine political debate, Katie Hopkins looked straight into the camera and said what millions across Britain had quietly been thinking: Keir Starmer doesn't lead, he follows. The studio fell silent. The host froze. Even her critics couldn't look away. Because beneath the controversy, there was something chillingly honest about her words, something that hit a nerve across the nation. Hopkins didn't stop there. With that trademark mix of confidence and outrage, she pressed on. "We've got a man running this country's opposition who changes his mind more often than the weather," she said. "One day he's for the working class, the next he's pandering to the elites in Westminster. How can you trust a leader who doesn't even trust his own convictions?" Viewers at home felt the sting, not because it was shocking, but because, deep down, it sounded true. For months, Starmer had been trying to reshape his image, from cautious lawyer to decisive leader. But Hopkins wasn't buying it. "Britain doesn't need another puppet in a suit," she declared. "We need someone who actually believes in something, not someone who's terrified of saying the wrong thing." Her words cut through the political noise like a blade. It wasn't the polite language of politicians or pundits, it was raw, direct, and unfiltered. And that's exactly why it spread like wildfire online. Clips of the segment exploded across social media. "Katie Hopkins finally said it," wrote one user. "She's controversial, but she's right about Starmer," said another. The reaction wasn't just political, it was cultural. In a time when British politics felt increasingly scripted, Hopkins had dared to say what others whispered in private. But behind the drama, there was something deeper, a question about who Keir Starmer really is. Hopkins painted a picture of a man trapped between two worlds. He talks about working people, but he doesn't live like them. He talks about moral values, but he changes them depending on who's watching. He's not leading Labour, he's auditioning for approval. The words were brutal, but they struck at the core of Starmer's biggest weakness: his image as a man of principle who often looks uncertain about what those principles actually are. Even political insiders admitted the timing was dangerous for Labour. With an election looming, the last thing Starmer needed was a viral moment questioning his authenticity. And yet, as Hopkins spoke, her message resonated far beyond party lines. She wasn't just talking about Starmer, she was talking about something much bigger: the feeling that British politics had lost its soul. "Where's the passion? Where's the conviction?" she asked. "We used to have leaders who stood for something, now we've got PR-trained robots reading off scripts." For Starmer's supporters, it was an infuriating attack. They dismissed Hopkins as sensational, attention-seeking, and unfair. But even they couldn't deny the growing sense of disconnection between the Labour leader and the public. Every polished speech, every safe answer, every carefully worded statement seemed to push him further away from the people he claimed to represent. And in that moment, Hopkins didn't sound like a provocateur, she sounded like a mirror reflecting a quiet national frustration. Behind the scenes, Labour strategists reportedly scrambled. Advisors worried that Hopkins' comments would stick, not because of who said them, but because of how they felt. They exposed a truth that was hard to spin, that for many, Starmer remained a mystery. Was he the reformer Britain needed, or just another cautious politician afraid to take risks? That uncertainty had haunted him for years, and now, under Hopkins' spotlight, it was impossible to ignore. Days later, Starmer finally responded, saying he wouldn't be distracted by noise. But the damage was already done. The phrase, "Katie was right," trended for 48 hours straight. Analysts debated whether this was a turning point, not just for Starmer's image, but for the entire political conversation. Newspapers dissected her comments. Because when someone as polarizing as Katie Hopkins becomes the unlikely voice of national sentiment, something bigger is happening. And yet, there was something even more unsettling about the moment. Hopkins' rant wasn't just about politics, it was about leadership, honesty, and trust. About a Britain that feels tired of half-truths and professional smiles. That maybe, just maybe, her words forced the country to confront an uncomfortable possibility. The problem isn't just the politicians, but the system that rewards caution over courage, performance over passion. As the dust settled, one question echoed louder than the outrage, louder than the headlines. If the only person willing to speak the uncomfortable truth is someone like Katie Hopkins, what does that say about everyone else? Because in that studio, for just a few electrifying minutes, the mask slipped. And Britain saw not just Keir Starmer's weakness, but a reflection of its own, a nation desperate for authenticity in a world built on political theater.